Hello, my name is Tosca Bruno van Vijwijken and I'm with the Transnational NGO Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute has been launched this year, this September, by the Maxwell School. It's a leadership preparation program geared towards transnational NGO leaders, and particularly those who currently work just below the top leadership at the second tier of responsibility in their organizations and who wish to prepare themselves for top leadership. The program benefits both professionals seeking top positions, as I said, but also organizations mindful about securing a successful leadership succession. Today I'm undertaking a brief interview with Lindsay, who is a participant as well as a steering group contributor to the Transnational NGO Leadership Institute. And Lindsay has the position of Executive Vice President with InterAction, and I should explain that InterAction is the U.S. national platform of development and relief organizations in the U.S. context. Thank you, Lindsay, for allowing us to interview you. This will be very helpful to practitioners, to students and faculty interested in leadership preparation and succession. So first, a little bit about who I'm talking to today. What's the nature and mission of InterAction? I explained it very briefly, but please, you can do that.
InterAction is the leadership space for the U.S. NGO community, and that manifests itself in basically sort of three ways. We have a core competency around standards for NGOs, and we have a whole sort of series of work that we do to professionalize the sector in the United States. And that's very important for InterAction members working with other partners, whether it's a business community or other NGOs or multilaterals. If you say you're an InterAction member, you have met certain standards for good governance and financial probity. So that's one big piece of our work. Another large piece of our work is community of practice kind of work. So we build technical expertise for our members on everything from disaster risk reduction to food security and agriculture. We map where our members are working in particular areas to provide transparency for both within the community and other stakeholders in development and humanitarian relief. And then another piece of work, which is a big piece of my work personally, is policy advocacy and communications. What can we do to raise the brand of NGOs working on poverty globally, how we support a constituency for that work in the United States, how we present that work in a way that garners support from Congress, the administration, the World Bank, those kinds of fora.
I see. And just to get a little bit of a sense of scale in terms of the organizations, the NGOs you represent, how many do you
There are 200 member organizations. They run the gamut from very large brand names that you will know, like CARE and World Vision and Save the Children, Oxfam, to small organizations that are highly professional and do very good work, but are not as widely known.
Okay, that gives us a sense. Could you tell us, please, how you got involved in transnational activism and how you over time became a leader in your organization? You have a particularly interesting career track.
I have a checkered career. I started life as a civil rights lawyer in Mississippi, and I came from Mississippi to Washington, D.C. to be chief of staff at the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education. So that was my first real leadership job that I had, which was in the late 90s. And when I finished that work, I was really interested in exploring roles where I could lead, because I understood about myself that I actually had some talent for managing, although at that time most of it was around sort of aligning people and resources. OCR is a team of about 1,000 lawyers within the federal government, and that's a very challenging group to sort of align and mobilize and all that, and so I supported the deputy secretary in doing that work around civil rights. So when I finished that job, I was very interested in moving into a managerial role as a lawyer, and I ended up at a smaller advocacy organization that focused on access to family planning for women globally, and I was the COO there, and that job was very focused on, largely focused on operational work, and I learned a lot about sort of practical management stuff, but the organization was small enough that I had to be involved in strategic choices around program, even though I was not a technical expert in the program area. And InterAction, this organization is an InterAction member, and I was actually recruited to the job that I currently hold. I was recruited to be Vice President for Public Policy and Communications, and then about a year ago promoted from within to be the Executive Vice President.
Very interesting. Also, the transition from the federal government civil rights law office, which was very large in scale, as you were saying, in terms of management span also, and to a fairly large international NGO, but with very strategic as well as programmatic roles, and then back again to a very large representative organization.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Can you tell us more? You were one of our guiding lights in terms of the steering group for the Leadership Institute, but you also chose to participate. Tell us more, please, about the upcoming leadership leap that you wish at some point to prepare for. How do you see that leap?
Part of my, two things. I'm very acutely aware, because of where I sit at InterAction, that NGOs have an institutional leadership problem. There's a generational change, as I perceive it, going on right now in the U.S. context. So there were essentially a lot of baby boomers, and I'm at the very tail end, depending on how you count. I'm a baby boomer or not, but I'm at the very tail end of that group. And that group is retiring and moving on, and it's not very often not apparent who is going to fill that role. And I think over the next 10 years, there's going to be a real cycling change. And some organizations are going outside the NGO context and are pulling business leaders or leaders from other contexts, which I don't think is in and of itself a bad thing. But I also am concerned that organizations are not fully using their resource from within. And there's also tied to that a lot of founderitis, where a founder of an organization is having difficulty letting go, and even letting someone in as a successor becomes complex. So as an advisory board member, I think NGOs and civil society are crucial for human well-being going forward. And I think the United States has a leadership responsibility, but we're going to have to be very different in our frames in terms of how we think about development and how that's done. And one of the things that concerns me is that leaders who have not been part of that dialogue about what development is may not be positioned to really understand the broader context very well. Say if someone comes solely from another sector, they may not understand the ocean that we're all swimming in. So I think that's really critical. On a personal level, I decided to participate in this because there is so little opportunity to reflect on what I'm doing or where I want to go. And to tell the truth, this program was great, but there was also little opportunity to reflect. There was a little time and space. I don't know, I had this idea that I guess I thought I wasn't going to sleep. That I would just sit in my hotel room and, after a stimulating day of discussion and sort of contemplate this. But I have been given a lot of food for thought about the kinds of things that are different in being a CEO. And I've watched it up close from a couple of perspectives, as a chief of staff, as a COO, as an executive vice president. But I've never, it's very difficult to have a conversation with your boss about their job without that being misinterpreted in some way. It's an awkward thing. And I have an amazing boss with whom I have a lot of conversations, and he and I do sort of touch on this and touch on my development, but we're both so busy it's very hard to even have that conversation. So just in terms of time. So this has been tremendously useful because it spurred a lot of thinking, and I only wish I had another week that I could just do nothing and just think about this and think about what it means for me.
Yeah. Yet you said you haven't spent this much time with your coworkers.
I know.
As intensively as the last 5-6 days.
Yeah.
So, maybe you've already answered that question, but to you, what distinguishes top leaders from leaders at your responsibility? What did you think about it before you came into this program, and have you amended, shifted any of your thinking about that?
What distinguishes?
Yeah. What's different in that leap? Just if you needed to.
I think there are several things, and these are things I've sort of known intuitively, but this program's really thrown it into relief. I'm very active in our budgets, but I'm not ultimately responsible. I'm very active in our management of the board, but I'm not ultimately responsible. I'm very active in how the organization shapes its vision. Mm-hmm. But if somebody doesn't like it, I'm not the person they get mad at. Mm. So the whole level of responsibility, problem or challenge or fear is very much more real to me now and concrete as I think about it. Mm-hmm.
As well as the idea of the buck stops here.
Yeah, exactly.
The buck doesn't stop entirely with you now yet, but it will in the future.
Yeah, and I feel very accountable anyway. It's not to say I don't, but it's just, it's different.
Yeah. Well, no, I shouldn't. I should ask the question differently. Are there any issues your organization is facing at this moment in regard to leadership, succession, and transition? You've already told us about the whole baby boomer and the vacuum that seems to be building that needs to be filled. Mm-hmm. Is there anything specific to InterAction that you in a public space can talk about, or are there really not such issues?
Our CEO has been at InterAction for 5 years. Before him, we had about 4 CEOs in 5 years. I mean, it was very difficult. It was a lot of turnover. And I guess the thing that is useful about my role right now is that if something unforeseen was to happen to our CEO, I'm at least clearly identified as the person who would pick things up immediately. And it would be politically unpleasant for me probably to have a conversation about whether I'm the long-term leader. It would probably handicap me in what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And I think that probably drives a lot of reluctance about that conversation, because I think ultimately for me, leadership is largely about fit and sort of right moment for the organization, right moment in the environment the organization is operating in, and at whenever InterAction is in a position that it needs new leadership, I don't know if I'm a fit. And I think that's the way you have to think about it. You have to think about, the way I think about it is, I want to be as prepared as I can be if something bad happens to Sam, which I don't want it to at all. So I need to be prepared to do that, because I have a fiduciary, emotional relationship to my organization. And I think that doing that, staying in that mindset, is going to also be the best way to serve myself in terms of thinking about where I want to be.
That's right. Yes. Finally, you came in with a lot of knowledge, and you contributed a lot of knowledge through your role in the steering group to the Institute. But are there any important lessons or skills you have learned from attending the Institute that if you said, there were 2 or 3 things that I hadn't thought so much about, that you take away?
I think the importance of defining vision is really critical. I have tended to have, in my other sort of second roles as a chief of staff and a COO, those roles are very operational. And I've been through several strategic planning processes. And that's only one way of defining vision. There are lots of ways, and lots of ways vision is manifested and all that. But I think sort of developing your own sense of vision, understanding that vision, sharing the vision so others accept the vision, all of that has been that whole conversation has been very useful to me, especially as it relates to the practical operational things that I already understand.
Right, right. Thank you. This has been very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. It was fun.
Thank you.